Hello and welcome everyone, welcome back. We are resuming this series of unlearning the falsehoods. I know it's been quite a while. We had discontinued this series because there were things that needed to be taken care of, and now they have been taken care of. So we are back with another episode in this series of the ancient history of Bharat. Okay, this holy land of ours has a lot to offer, and I would say one lifetime isn't enough for us to learn everything there is to learn about this very special country of ours. All right. Okay. So in the last episode, we spoke about the gods of the Aryans. What were their conceptions of God? All right. Further in this book, further in the chapter of religion and philosophy, R.C. Majumdar, he elaborates about the terrestrial gods. Okay, who were the forces? Okay, what were the forces that the people who identified as Aryans in those age? What were the forces that they worshipped? Okay, you guessed it right. They worshipped, you know, the forces of nature. Okay, it's a no-brainer. Obviously, when you have just transitioned from the hunter-gatherer to the a settler kind of a community, you'll have time for leisure. You'll have time to think about things, and hence you will worship the forces of nature, because those are the forces with whom you spend most of your day. Because when you're sitting idle, when you have time for leisure, you observe the nature and you are fascinated by those observations. Okay, so naturally the Aryans, they worshipped these forces of nature, and there were some gods on this earth as well, those terrestrial gods. Okay, now amongst the primary terrestrial gods that Aryans worshipped, one of them was Agni, as in the fire god. Okay, fire is the oldest force of nature that was worshipped by the Aryans, and so Agni, a personification of sacrificial fire, household life for the Vedic Aryans. Indra, okay, whose conception presents the external life of struggle and conquest. Okay, the mere worship of gods also tells you a lot about the philosophy of the people, because if they are worshipping a god, okay, a war god no less, okay, praying for victory and everything else, okay, what might their life would have been like? Okay, so here R.C. Majumdar, in this chapter on page number 376, he says the fact that they worshipped Indra, a warlord. Okay, why would somebody worship a warlord? Okay, presents their external life of struggle and conquest. Okay, so their life was riddled with struggles and conquest. Okay, so hence they worshipped Indra. All right. On the next page, R.C. Majumdar writes, Agni is a favorite topic of the Rig Samhita poets. Okay, the Dvijanam. Okay, like having two births from the point of view of twofold division of the universe into heaven and earth. Okay, now the reason why Agni was worshipped was it was believed that the fire is a messenger between the humans and the divine. Okay, whatever you offer to the fire, fire will rightfully deliver it to the gods. Okay, so this was the belief of the Aryans, and to this very day we practice this. Okay, you might have observed this in many of the cultural traditions we have. There will be some place for the fire. Okay, there is no worship without fire. There has to be some degree of fire, and let's say even the metaphorical fire, there has to be some fire. Then at the end there has to be some fire within you for you to worship something. Okay, so Rig Samhita, 5000 years ago, these poets, they wrote that fire is an intermediary between the gods and the humans. So whatever you offer to the fire reaches the god. Okay, and hence you will see elaborate sacrificial ceremonies, elaborate havans that were undertaken, and there were many offerings that were made in those havans. Okay, here R.C. Majumdar writes, he is the Duta, the messenger par excellence, appointed by gods and men to be an oblation bearer. As the central figure of the sacrifice, he is called variously Ritvij, Vipra, Purohita, Advaryu and Brahman, and and is thus the divine counterpart of the earthly priesthood. Okay, so counterpart, let's say for example, if S. Jaishankar is our external affairs minister, then the external affairs minister of, let's say, United States or Russia would be his counterpart. Okay, so all those learned people who on this planet Earth, who all on this territory of Earth, okay, their counterparts were the gods. It's not me saying this, it's Rig Samhita 5000 years ago, it is they have mentioned this. Okay, so yeah, so it was these are the names by which those people were known. Okay, the funeral hymn distinguishes between the Havya Vahana, form of Agni, conveyor of offerings, and the Kravyad, form of Agni that burns the dead body on the funeral pyre. Now, interestingly, here we were led to believe in the earlier chapters by R.C. Majumdar that the people of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, they buried there alive, and that is also one of the reasons why we called Mohenjo-daro as the city of the dead or something. There is some degree, yeah, that is how it translates to that Mohenjo-daro, or I guess Harappa. One of them is known as the the burial city or the burial mound or whatever, something. So if indeed they buried it, why exactly does Rig Samhita mention about funeral pyres, things that were burnt? Now you understand the logic behind why do we burn our dead. When I say I mean Aryans, and Aryans would be a very politically incorrect term to say it, so I'll say pagans. Okay, because there are many people out there who believe that just because Hitler misappropriated, not exactly Hitler but Nazi Germany, just because they misappropriated some of our symbolisms and some of our ways, we are not supposed to reclaim them. Why? Because it would be offensive to the Jews. Quite frankly, we have been the only race who have been very kind to the Jews. So you cannot make that argument that just because Nazi Germany misappropriated some of our mannerisms and some of our philosophies about governance and whatnot, we cannot reclaim it simply because it would offend the Jews. That is a foolish argument to be made. Okay. So let's see. Yes. So there are there are examples of funeral pyres in the Rig Samhita. So how do you reconcile this argument? We have been led to believe that the Mohenjo-daro and people in the Harappa, they buried their dead. Even I was convinced, but in this chapter, R.C. Majumdar has reopened that debate. At least he is not questioning it, but this is me who is questioning it. How exactly did the transition happen? What happened that the people of Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, who used to bury their dead, suddenly in the Rig Samhita it says that there were also funeral pyres, started burning their dead. Okay. So how do you reconcile these two arguments? Now I'm open to public debate and everything else. So if you have an answer to this, you can comment on this video. Okay. There are but few deities in the Rig Samhita that cannot be explained, though this may not be necessary as manifestation of either the one or the other. Now, the sun is regarded as the form of Agni, and the Agni is said to be born as the rising sun in the morning. As you can see, yes, since they had leisure time and they had time to stay around and look at things, so I would say, yeah, they were fascinated by the rising sun and whatnot. Okay, Brihaspati, also called as Brahmanaspati, Lord of the Prayer, has but few physical features. These are the usual ones ascribed to all other gods. Like Agni, he is both a domestic priest and a Brahmin priest and the generator of all prayers. He is identified with as well as distinguished from Agni. Okay. Being often invoked with Indra, he is drawn into the Indra myth of the release of the cows. Thus, he has no homogeneous character, combining in himself as he does martial as well as priestly elements. Okay, so this idea that each individual has to have a homogeneous character. So either you imbibe the martial spirit and live out your entire life in that manner, or you imbibe the, the spirit of knowledge, and then that is how you spend the rest of your life. But that is quite in contradiction to what exactly the Rig Samhita mentions, because here it says that there is no homogeneous character. If you had to be a person of value, if you had to be a person who was extremely respectable and highly regarded by the society, you needed to excel at both the fronts. You needed to have a martial spirit, and also you needed to have knowledge. Okay, so this argument about the shastras and the shastras, you need to have a healthy balance of both in order for you to be a highly successful or highly regarded man in the community. Okay, to point out one example, if you've seen this movie that is Ranveer Singh is in that movie. Which movie is this? About the Peshwas. I'm forgetting the name. I guess it's Bajirao Mastani. Yes, it's Bajirao Mastani. So in that movie there is a dialogue that says he from birth he is a Brahman, but from his actions, okay, he had imbibed that Kshatriya spirit. All right, so you should see that movie. Not exactly that movie, but you can I think you must have already seen that movie. So that is how that argument makes sense. Okay, there is no homogeneous character. Your character needs to imbibe both these values, the Kshatriya and the Shastra, and then you are a complete man. That is the definition of a complete man according to the philosophy of the Aryans. Okay. The Soma has three kinds of. Now we move on to Soma. Soma has been mentioned as another god. Okay, it was a drink, you can say it was some sort of a medicine that was crafted by the learned saints in the Rig Samhita age. Okay, and it had many uses. Soma was used as I don't know, but yeah, it had a lot of purposes. It was used during sacrifices. It was it was thought of as a drink of immortality. So Soma has three kinds of admixtures. You can either make Soma drink with a milk, or with dahi, or with barley, and have it 3 times a day. It is a divine drink conferring immortality on gods and men. It is called Amrita, the draught of immortality. Okay, so yeah, there is also this riddle that has to be solved. We don't exactly know for sure and with absolute certainty which plant exactly is Soma. Okay, it could be any given thing, and we don't want to rush. But yes, it has been mentioned in the Rig Samhita 5,000 years ago, and we don't know how many years exactly prior to that was this tradition in practice before actually being written down. Okay. So here Soma grows on the mountains. Soma is a king, the lord of the plants and the lord of the woods. Okay, Vanaspati. In a few of the latest hymns of the Rig Samhita, Soma is mystically identified with the moon. Okay, there is too much of ambiguity when it comes to Soma. There are some hymns in the Rig Samhita that draw parallels between the moon and the Soma. So we don't exactly know. The rivers are also lauded, the most important among them being the Saraswati, in whose case, okay, Saraswati as a river has been mentioned in the Rig Samhita. So 5,000 years ago, if there was a river that was mentioned, for all the students of and you don't need to be a geography expert to form a correct approximation of this. If there is a river flowing on a certain course, how many centuries prior to that particular point would that river have chosen that course? So if Saraswati has been mentioned in the Rig Samhita, okay, it wasn't a fluke. Okay, it wasn't like people of the Rig Samhita, the Aryans of that time, they were constantly high on Soma and they were writing whatever they could, based on their whims and fancies. These had to have had some motivation from real life observations and lived reality. Okay, so having said that, there indeed was a river called Saraswati 5,000 years ago. Now how many years prior to that did river Saraswati exist. And even on top of that, how many years prior to that, did river Saraswati come into existence? Now, I'm not denying the geological process or geographical process through which rivers take shape, but it did exist. There are people out there who will deny the existence of Saraswati river. Let's move ahead. Incantations to preserve life, to bring on sleep, and to procure offspring are found in the Rig Samhita. While the well-known Frogheim is supposed to envisage frogs as magical bringers of rain, I guess all of you all might have at least heard this once in your life, okay? Through people who live close to you, through people, your friends or your elders. There is this widespread common knowledge among people, at least in our country, that is Bharat, that whenever you start seeing frogs on street, okay, it is likely that the rains are close. Okay, now this very thing has been mentioned in Rig Samhita. Okay, it says that frogs are supposed to have been magical bringers of rain. Okay, so it's not indeed a myth or a superstition, if you might say, if you might believe that. Okay, it is indeed true that the frogs, they did bring rain. Okay, it's mentioned in the Rig Samhita that was written 5,000 years ago, and how many years prior to that was it, perfected through the, trials and tribulations of, trial and error. So it's not without reason, and whatever we believe, it's not without, some good reasonable explanation. Next up is the principal phenomena of nature conceived as alive and represented as anthropomorphic objects of worship. Now here is when things start becoming interesting. Okay, R.C. Majumdar on page number 380, he writes that whether the worship of idols or images of gods was known to the Aryans in the Rig Samhita are points on which no certain conclusions can be reached. Okay, so it's not, we don't have any exact evidence about whether the Aryans, whether they were idol worshippers or not. So far it is clear that they worshipped the forces of nature. Okay, so if indeed they worshipped the forces of nature, we don't know whether they worship the idols or not. Okay. Next up in this chapter is the topic of sacrifice. Okay. Though the feeling of dependence was there, and though the surrender of one's property and possessions became ultimately the mark of deep affection for God, it was the definite hope and expectation of rewards that chiefly inspired the offerings of prayers and oblations in the Rig Samhita. But who was to carry the offerings from earth to the gods in heaven? Okay, you can find some logical explanation for fire. Okay, now I get it. Fire was invented because some or the other person, and that person most likely lived on this subcontinent, struck two stones together and there was a fire. Okay, there is some degree of, reason to this argument that fire was invented, but, it was the Aryans in the Rig Vedic age. They found a logical explanation for fire to exist. Like I have mentioned in the beginning of this video, fire was an intermediary between, the humans and the gods who resided in the celestial heavens, whatever. Okay. As regards the more mystic view of the sacrifice as a sacrament, the common meal of the priests on the sacrificial victim may only be looked upon as a bare hint in that direction. Because, though the priests believed that this meal brought them into a special relationship with the god, who, by sharing it with them, acquired in part the same nature as themselves, it is doubtful whether they deemed themselves to be consuming the victim. It may be noted in this connection that the union or companionship with the gods or with the sun is vouchsafed to those who give the liberally or those who are generous with the sacrificial fees. Okay, now there are certain ideas over here that need to be unpacked. One of them is, okay, this myth, that's not exactly a myth, but it is a very well propagated, how shall I put this into words, very well propagated, or very well crafted fake narrative of the Aryans. When I say Aryans, I mean in all my videos, when I say Aryans, I mean pagans, okay, the nationals of Bharat, okay. If you don't want to reclaim your identity, so be it, okay. I'm not going to hold back and live my life as an Indian, because I'm not an Indian, okay. So yeah, that is because it's a false identity that was given to us by the British, and yeah, it is what it is. Alright, so yes, now this is a false narrative that was, I guess, it has been very well crafted, to deceive us, to make us believe that majority of the Aryans were, vegetarians. Now this idea of pacifism, as in not killing any other living thing or any other living being, okay, that comes from the philosophy of pacifism that finds its roots, more articulately in, I would say Jainism, okay, the philosophy and the theology of the Jains, okay. Now I'm in no way criticizing any of their philosophies. They are free to have any philosophy that they like, yeah, freedom of expression, do what you may, but so using that philosophy and blanketly applying it all across this geography of Bharat is grossly incorrect, and up to a level criminal, I would say, okay. So this idea that the priestly class does not consume non-vegetarian food is not even a myth. Myth implies that at one degree of point it was a lived reality, people actually some degree of truth in it, but this is just a wholesome lie, a fake narrative that was created to keep us away from our own identity. So yes, here on page number 380, R.C. Majumdar writes that the priests who officiated at those sacrifices, okay, they would eat the meat of that sacrificial animal, okay. Now there is also some reasoning given as to why exactly did they do this, okay, because they believed that since they ate that meat, okay, they are sharing some part with the divine, they are sharing some part with the God, because since they have done that sacrifice and offered it to fire will carry it, the Agni will carry it to the gods, okay, and the gods are also having that thing. Simultaneously, the priests who officiated at that sacrifice, they will also have that meat. So in a way, they are, let's say, with, here in his words, I would say, the priests believed that this meal brought them into a special relationship with the God, who, by sharing it with them, acquired in part the same nature as themselves. They believed that since the God were also having that thing, we are also having that thing, and hence we are equivalent to God, at least in that moment or at least during that time. Okay? So, if the Rig Samhita 5000 years ago mentions this, that the priests, the supposedly the name that we have given them today, that is Brahmins, at least the name is right, but in the way we have classified our population into things, it's I would say it's a terrible tragedy how we have adopted this classification of the West. But more about it if I have some time in other videos. But yes, the priests, they consumed the meat of the very animal that they had sacrificed, okay. Used as benedictions and prayers at birth, marriage, and other occasions of daily life, at funerals and ancestor worship. There is also a mention of ancestor worship, okay. So it's not a new thing. This was not invented out of the blue. These things existed 5000 years ago and they're still in practice, Okay, so people who say that these things are all superstitions, okay, and they are more likely to be people from the monotheistic traditions because they, are part of faith that was newly, I wouldn't say invented, but newly formulated. Okay. These simple sacrifices, which everyone, rich or poor, performed according to his means, consisted chiefly of prayers. The first stage of Vedic religion, the grand sacrifices. Okay. The Soma cult relating to Indra, which could only be undertaken by aristocratic and wealthy men, and especially by the kings. Okay, there were some sacrifices that were costly to undertake, so it was only, the people who had resources, they are the ones who could have managed to go ahead with these sacrifices. Others did these sacrifices, but not on such a larger scale. Okay. There is also some mention about human sacrifices as well, but there is no clear conclusive evidence. All right. Now the philosophy of the Rig Samhita, because largely, if you see the surviving religions of I would say classifying the Aryanhood or the Aryan way of life as a religion is grossly incorrect. Just because the West terms it as religion, I'm not going to bow down and classify it as religion. It's something different from religion, but that is how, if you understand us, then yes, for your ease and for your convenience, I'm willing to call it a religion, but it's definitely not religion in a sense that the Western world understands. Okay. Now here is quite interesting paragraph that R.C. Majumdar writes on page number 382. I would like to read it and then we'll discuss it. But the Rig Samhita betrays discontent even with this monotheistic development in the single supreme anthropomorphic deity that should follow from it. Okay, the Rig Samhita Mandala 1, hymn number 164 says, "Who has seen the firstborn when the boneless one bore the one with bones?" Okay, this is questioning. Who exactly saw the first person who brought all these things into existence? Okay. Where is the life, the blood, the self of this bhumi? Has anyone approached the knowing one to ask this question? Okay. So that individual who 5,000 years ago put this down into writing, okay. Now it is safe to assume that, let's say, centuries ago these things were in practice, these hymns, before being written down. Okay, so they have at least acknowledged this sentiment that yes, somebody has to have approached a person who knew the answers to these questions. So it is safe to assume that they themselves did not know the answers to these questions. Okay, as if in answer to this question, has anyone approached the knowing one to ask this question? So they agree that there is somebody who knows it, but they don't know how to define that he or she or whatever. Let's not get into that, but there is somebody out there, not I would say in the human form, but there has to have been somebody out there in those times who knew, okay, the answers to these questions. And if not exactly answers to these questions, then I would say to have better questions, because whenever you have a question and you find an answer to it, it's more likely that you will come up with another question. Okay, and if in answer to this question, verse 46 of the same hymn affirms that the central principle was the sexless Sat, which, though one was called by various names, Indra, Mitra, Varuna, Agni, Yama, etc., Thus, in some of the late hymns of the Rig Samhita, which designate indifferently the supreme or the absolute he or it, is reflected the usual vacillations between monotheism and monism. Okay, here is again my profound disagreement with the the philosophies of the Aryan, and that is the thing that I love about my faith. I am allowed to question the oldest of the authority. Okay. Now here is my profound disagreement. Okay. If indeed, okay, first let's decide upon the gender of the God. Is God he or a she? Okay. Now you'll say, how does it matter? Okay, then let's assume that there is no gender for God. Okay. So it's like that Heisenberg's cat in chemistry. Okay. The gender of the God is unknown. It's inside that box. Right. We'll have to open that box to know what is the gender of the God. Okay. But let's keep that box closed. Okay. There is God inside that box. We don't know the gender to it. But for that God to have been inside that box, somebody should have birthed it. It's a logical argument. Somebody should have birthed it. That is, birth is the ultimate magic of nature. You cannot give birth to an individual without the union or unison of both the genders. Okay, and that is why the Aryan faith, the Aryanhood worships divinity in both the genders, the male and the female, and that's only strictly limited to the Aryanhood, not to the monotheistic traditions. Okay, quite frankly, Islam treats their women like shit. Okay, so, but that's again another monotheistic tradition. Even Christianity, that's a discussion for an entire different video. But let's stick to our video for our agenda for this video. Okay, so if God is not Schrodinger's cat. Okay, Schrodinger's cat. If indeed God is Schrodinger's cat, okay, you'll have to open that box to know the gender of God. But the mere fact that there is some entity called God inside that Schrodinger's box, okay, somebody might have birthed that, and for birth to take place you need both the genders, the male and the female. Okay, so that is why we worship both the genders, the divine in both the genders. Of course, I know there will be people who disagree with there are multiple genders and whatnot, but let's keep that argument to another video. I'm not here to discuss about genders. I'm just trying to make a point as to why exactly we are the only surviving civilization that worships the divinity in female. Alright, it's a long chapter. This book is all writing, no pictures, so it's rather boring to read this book, but it has its moments. Sometimes it's interesting, sometimes it's just outright boring, I would say. The primary sense of wreath appearing alongside of and yet clearly distinguished from its secondary sense or senses is the physical one. Rita is the path of the zodiac within which the apparent motions of the devas are confined and which is dotted by the nakshatras. Rita next comes to denote very naturally the cosmic order or law prevailing in nature. This was written 5,000 years ago. Okay, this has to be the basis of our morality. Whatever conforms with the wreath, the cosmic order that is guarded by Varuna, is right. What does not conform with the wreath, the cosmic order that was protected by Varuna, is wrong. Okay, right and wrong are not subjective, as the contemporary world will lead you on to believe. It's pretty easy in this part of the world if you want to distinguish right from the wrong. It's simply anything that confers to the wreath. Yeah, I mean, agreed. You'll have to study a lot to realize what exactly is Reeth. I myself is in the process of learning it, but who knows? Okay. The problem of the origin and the nature of the world stuff is a philosophical one, and is not neglected by the Rig Vedic poets. Okay, the Rig Samhita tells us that from the heat, tapas, were produced Rita and Satya. Then night, the ocean, and Samvatsara year were produced in succession. Says that Sat was produced from Asat. Okay, it also talks about heat. Okay, Rita came into being through heat. Nasadyaheim, okay, for people who have not studied anything about Nasadyaheim, I would strictly recommend you to read that Haim. It is really an eye opener. Things will start making sense. Although after they start making sense, you will have more questions, but at least they would be better questions. There are hymns that further tell us that desire, the germ of the mind, betraying self-consciousness, is the bond binding the existent to the non-existent. Okay, usually we are told that it was indeed Buddha who came up with this theory that desire is the root of all sorrow. He might have come up with it, but you will find it, mentions about desire being the ultimate root of sorrow in Rig Samhita. Okay, so this is again an eye-opener for people who believe that Jainism, Buddhism and all these things are somehow different, from they had a single ideological forefather, that is the Vedas. Every other branch that you see in this part of the subcontinent, including Jainism, I would go until far as saying Sikhism as well. All these things are just different manifestations and modifications, demanded by the exigencies of the time, and hence these faiths came up. All right. So the same idea that desire is the ultimate root of all sorrow has been mentioned in Rig Samhita. So this should be sufficient for you to at least develop an inquiry as to how original was the Buddha's idea of desire being the root cause of all sorrow. He might have articulated it better. He might have given some different ideas that he has, but it definitely wasn't original. Okay, the Rig Samhita further mentions that instead of the 5 elements of later philosophy, the Rig Samhita postulates only water as the primordial element or matter from which the others gradually evolve. Okay, the Rig Samhita mentions that initially there was only water, there was no other natural force that existed. The gods are the agents of creation. The act of creation is a sacrifice, and the Purusha is a victim. Okay. So whatever world that you see around yourself is the result of the sacrifice that was done by God. You'll see that similar sentiment is also present in Christianity. They believe that Christ, he died for the sake of humanity. He died because the humanity had to survive. The only difference is this was way before Christ was born. Yeah. Suppose it that there is a reference here to the way to the other world. Now here we are talking about the ethical and spiritual, philosophies of the Aryans. So there is a reference here to the way to the other world. Companionship with sun and the gods and immortality are highly prized goals. Yama was the first of the mortals who died and discovered the way to the realm over which he rules and which is the destination of the subsequent dead. So R.C. Majumdar, he writes in his book In page number 384, he says that, the god of the dead. It's rather interesting for you to think, okay? On a side note, Yamaraj, the god of death, is also known by the name of Dharmaraj. What is Dharma? Dharma is a cosmic order. Okay, so in a way, Yamaraj, he is protecting Dharma. Dharma is what? Cosmic order. What is cosmic order? The way in which things need to proceed. Otherwise, you will sin. That is what R.C. Majumdar says in the further part of this book that we are going to cover shortly. But yes, Yamaraj is known as Dharmaraj, also known as Dharmaraj. The goal of all human endeavor is to become like gods. Okay, that is why we have multiple ideas of God. Okay, people who worship different forms of God, they usually have this innate desire of, at least imbibing or manifesting at least one or two qualities of that God that they are worshipping. Okay, so the goal of all human endeavor is to become like gods, not just worship it. Okay, now here there is also a definition of sin. Okay, like usually people say that there is no definition of clear sin in your philosophy when they usually are talking about the pagans of the subcontinent of Bharat. Okay, now there is a definition of sin. Let me just clarify you. In page number 385, R.C. Majumdar writes, and I quote, okay, sin resulted from the violation of rita or order in the moral sphere, that is of truth and right, as well as in the religious one, that is the sacrifice or right of the commands of God. So whenever you diverge or depart from the rita or the cosmic order that was protected by Varuna, you are deemed to have committed a sin. And this is the germ of the idea of karma. If you do something that disagrees with the cosmic order, definitely karma will visit you. And the thing is, even the Rig Samhita mentions this, the law of karma is also binding on gods as well. So even gods are not, an exception to the law of karma. If the gods, they commit a sin, they will have to, pay for it. They would be held accountable for it. There's a very famous story of Krishna. He dies as a result of something that he did long time ago. Okay, so karma will visit you. Okay, and that has an inherent origin in our philosophy. All right. Rig Samhita is full of prayers for long life, freedom from disease, heroic progeny, wealth, power, abundance of food and drink. Okay, whether life was reality or illusion, substance or shadow, they want to enjoy it to the full. They do not seem to subscribe to the doctrine that life is a misery which can only be ended by eradicating desire or vasana. Okay, now I have seen people who will completely live in denial, that they do not have desire for everything. It is pretty much evident from your actions. Okay, no human being is without any desire. It's it's rationally impossible for a human being to have no desires. Okay, there is a very funny one of whenever elders, they come to your home, you are supposed to touch their feet and seek blessings from them. Okay, and once during the festival of, I don't exactly remember it, but it was Diwali. During the festivals of Diwali, one of the elders, they came to my place and I touched his feet. Okay, and he said these exact words. Okay, that beta aapki sari manokamna puri ho jaye. And this is something that struck me. Okay, for a second I went into introspection as to, because I had read it somewhere that there is no end to desire. If you have fulfilled one desire, there is another desire that will replace it. and even if you fulfill that desire, there will be another desire in the waiting to replace it. Okay, so this is an unending chain. So this blessing that, may all your desires be fulfilled, is null and void, because there is no end to desire. So what is the rational basis for this blessing? And if you have an answer to this, please comment. Okay, but I'm not belittling this practice of seeking blessings from the elders. I take blessings from the ancestors, because ancestors and your elders. Obviously you need to do these things. Okay, just because the West tells you that all these things are superstition doesn't mean that you believe them. There are a lot of things that they do is based on superstitions, and they simply just don't stop doing it because we ask them questions about why exactly do you follow superstitions. They do it because it's their culture, hence we should do it because it is our culture. Okay, so yes, that's it from all these chapters, and I will see you guys in the next video with the next chapter, that is chapter number 19, the social and economic conditions of the Aryans in the Vedic age. That's it for this video. Thank you for watching.